What if I told you that the biggest difference between an average-looking garden and one that looks professionally designed isn't the flowers, the shrubs, or even the size of the landscape? It's the border. In fact, many beautiful gardens fail for one simple reason. The edges don't work. The border is where the eye begins its journey. It's the frame around the picture. And when that frame is messy, sparse, overgrown, or poorly planned, even expensive plants can look disappointing. That's why professional landscape designers pay so much attention to what grows along the front edge of a garden bed. A good border creates structure. A great border creates beauty. But the best borders do something even more important. They continue looking good long after the excitement of spring has faded. Today we're counting down 15 low-growing perennial plants that can help transform an ordinary garden into a landscape that looks intentionally designed. Some create carpets of flowers. Some provide year-round texture. Some naturally suppress weeds. And one plant near the end is so reliable that many professional designers use it repeatedly in completely different landscapes. But before we start the countdown, let's talk about the 3 mistakes that quietly ruin most garden borders. Because avoiding these mistakes is just as important as choosing the right plants. Border mistake number 1. Planting only for flowers. This is perhaps the most common mistake gardeners make. They choose plants based entirely on bloom color. The problem? Flowers come and go. A border that depends entirely on flowers often looks spectacular for 3 weeks and forgettable for the next 5 months. Professional designers think differently. They build borders around structure, texture, foliage, and form first. Flowers are the bonus. You'll notice many plants on today's list remain attractive even when they're not blooming. That's not an accident. That's good design. Border mistake number 2. Ignoring mature size. A plant tag may look innocent in the garden center. But 3 years later, that cute little plant might be swallowing the walkway. Many borders become crowded because gardeners focus on how plants look today rather than how they'll look in the future. The plants in this countdown stay relatively low and manageable, making them easier to incorporate into long-term designs. Border mistake number 3. Leaving exposed soil. Bare soil is an invitation. An invitation for weeds. An invitation for erosion. An invitation for a border to look unfinished. Many of today's plants naturally spread to cover the ground, helping create the full, lush appearance associated with professional landscapes. Now that we've covered the mistakes, let's begin the countdown. Number 15. Candytuft. Let's start with a problem nearly every gardener experiences. The garden finally wakes up after winter. The weather improves. You walk outside expecting beauty. Instead, the border looks tired, empty, and half asleep. Candytuft helps solve that problem. This evergreen perennial spends much of the year quietly providing structure, but when spring arrives, it completely changes character. Masses of brilliant white flowers cover the plant so thoroughly that the foliage nearly disappears. The effect is dramatic. From a distance, mature clumps can look like patches of fresh snow resting along the edge of a garden bed. But here's why designers love it. Most spring flowers disappear and leave behind a visual hole. Candytuft doesn't. Its evergreen foliage continues providing definition and structure long after flowering ends. In other words, it keeps doing its job. And that's a recurring theme among great border plants. The best ones never stop contributing. Coming up next is a plant that can make a border look like someone spilled paint across the landscape. Number 14. Creeping phlox. Every gardener has at least one spot that feels difficult to fill. Perhaps it's a slope. A retaining wall. A narrow strip along a pathway. Or an awkward edge where larger plants simply don't fit. Creeping phlox was practically designed for those locations. When spring arrives, this low-growing perennial erupts into an ocean of flowers. Pink. Purple. Blue. White. The colors are so dense that the foliage virtually disappears. But the flowers aren't the real secret. The real secret is coverage. As creeping phlox spreads, it creates a living carpet that softens hard edges and fills empty spaces naturally. That's exactly why professional landscapes often feel so polished. You rarely see large gaps. You rarely see bare soil. Everything appears connected. Creeping phlox helps create that effect. And speaking of color, the next plant may be the brightest burst of sunshine in the entire countdown. Number 13, Basket of Gold. Many gardeners battle challenging locations. Dry soil. Rocky soil. Poor soil. The kind of places where plants seem determined not to grow. Basket of Gold laughs at those conditions. In spring, this hardy perennial becomes covered with masses of golden yellow flowers that almost glow in the sunlight. The display is so bright that it often becomes one of the first things visitors notice. But here's something interesting. Professional designers frequently use silver foliage to make flower colors appear even brighter. Basket of Gold naturally combines both. Its silver-green foliage acts like a reflective backdrop, making those golden blooms stand out even more. That's one reason the plant photographs so well. And once flowering ends, the attractive foliage remains behind, continuing to provide texture and contrast. Now before we move to the next plant, here's a professional landscaping secret that can instantly improve almost any border. Designer's secret number 1. Never rely on a single type of beauty. Professional borders usually combine 3 elements: color, texture, structure. Color grabs attention. Texture creates interest. Structure creates order. If every plant offers only flowers, the border often feels flat. If every plant has the same leaf shape, the border feels repetitive. The most attractive borders mix flowering plants with interesting foliage and contrasting textures. As we continue this countdown, pay attention to how the best plants contribute more than one quality. That's exactly what makes them look professionally chosen rather than randomly planted. And the next plant demonstrates that principle perfectly because it doesn't just add color. It adds fragrance. Number 12, Dianthus. Have you ever visited a garden that looked beautiful but somehow felt forgettable? That's because great gardens aren't experienced with the eyes alone. The most memorable gardens engage multiple senses. That's where Dianthus earns its place. At first glance, it's easy to see why gardeners love it. The compact mounds of blue-green foliage stay neat and tidy, making them perfect for the front of a border. Then come the flowers. Pink, crimson, lavender, white. Some varieties even look as though each petal has been carefully hand-painted. But the real surprise arrives when you lean closer. Many Dianthus varieties produce a sweet, spicy fragrance that drifts through the garden on warm afternoons. Suddenly the border isn't just something you see. It's something you experience. Professional designers understand this principle well. They often place fragrant plants near walkways, patios, and seating areas because those are the places where people naturally slow down. A beautiful flower catches attention. A beautiful fragrance creates a memory. And that's why Dianthus continues to earn a place in garden designs decade after decade. But the next plant solves a completely different problem. A problem that makes many borders look sparse and unfinished. Number 11, Moss Phlox. One of the quickest ways to spot an amateur border is by looking for gaps. Little empty spaces. Patches of exposed soil. Areas where the design feels incomplete. Professional borders rarely have those issues because they use plants that connect the landscape together. Moss Phlox excels at that job. Unlike many flowering perennials that grow upward, Moss Phlox grows outward, forming dense cushions of evergreen foliage that hug the ground. Then spring arrives. And the transformation is astonishing. The entire plant becomes buried beneath a blanket of blooms. For several weeks, it can look more like a colorful cloud than a perennial. But what makes Moss Phlox especially valuable is what happens after flowering. The foliage remains. The structure remains. The border continues looking intentional. That's an important lesson in garden design. Flowers may create excitement. Structure creates beauty that lasts. And speaking of structure, the next plant demonstrates why some of the most powerful border plants aren't grown primarily for flowers at all. Number 10. Ajaga. Here's a surprising fact. Many professional designers choose foliage first and flowers second. That may sound strange. After all, flowers get most of the attention. But flowers are temporary. Leaves are there for much longer. That's why ajaga can be such a valuable addition to a border. Depending on the variety, the foliage may be bronze, burgundy, deep purple, chocolate-colored, or glossy green. Even before it blooms, it already looks decorative. Then spring arrives and blue flower spikes emerge above the foliage, adding another layer of interest. But the real magic happens at ground level. Ajaga spreads into a dense carpet that helps shade the soil and reduce weed pressure. Think about that for a moment. A plant that provides color, texture, seasonal flowers, and helps suppress weeds. That's exactly the type of multitasking that professional landscapes rely on. The best plants don't perform just one job. They perform several. And ajaga is a perfect example. Now before we move into the next section of the countdown, let's reveal another designer secret that can dramatically improve the appearance of any border. Designer secret number 2. The rule of repetition. Many gardeners accidentally turn their borders into plant collections. They buy one of this, one of that, one of something else. Soon the border contains 20 different plants, but it feels chaotic. Professional designers often do the opposite. Instead of using many plants once, they use fewer plants multiple times. Repeating the same plant throughout a border creates rhythm. Your eye naturally follows those repeating shapes and colors through the landscape. The garden begins feeling connected, organized, intentional. For example, instead of planting one lavender, one catmint, one dianthus, and one coreopsis, a designer may repeat each plant several times throughout the border. The result feels cohesive rather than random. As we continue the countdown, you'll notice that many of these plants become even more powerful when repeated. And coming up next, we're moving into a group of perennials that landscape designers love because they provide something every garden desperately needs. Long-lasting color. Not for weeks, but often for months. At this point in the countdown, we've covered plants that provide color, fragrance, texture, and weed suppression. But now we're moving into a category that can completely change how a border performs throughout the year. Longevity. Because one of the biggest frustrations in gardening is watching a beautiful display disappear almost as quickly as it arrived. The next 3 plants solve that problem in different ways, and one of them is considered by many gardeners to be among the longest blooming perennials you can grow. Number 9. Heuchera. Imagine walking into a garden center and discovering a plant that can provide color for months without relying on flowers. That's exactly what makes Heuchera so valuable. Also known as coral bells, this perennial has quietly become one of the most important foliage plants in modern landscape design. And once you see the color range available, it's easy to understand why. Lime green, silver, amber, peach, chocolate, deep burgundy, nearly black. Some varieties even change color as the season progresses. That's something flowers simply can't do. Professional designers often use Heuchera as a visual bridge between brighter flowering plants. The colorful foliage helps tie different parts of a border together, creating a more polished appearance. Then, when flowering season arrives, delicate stems rise above the foliage carrying hundreds of tiny bell-shaped flowers that dance in the breeze. Beautiful. Elegant. But still secondary to the foliage itself. Here's the real secret. Many borders look empty when flowers fade. Heuchera prevents that problem. Its leaves continue providing visual interest long after many flowering plants have finished their show. And the next plant proves that sometimes the most powerful design tool isn't color at all. It's texture. Number 8. Lamb's ear. If every plant in a border has the same shape, the same texture, and the same color, the landscape quickly becomes predictable. That's why professional designers constantly look for contrast. Lamb's ear provides it instantly. The first thing people notice is the color. Soft silver. Almost glowing in sunlight. Then they notice the texture. The leaves are covered with tiny hairs that create one of the softest surfaces in the garden. In fact, many visitors can't resist touching it. Children especially love this plant because it turns the garden into something interactive. But lamb's ear offers more than novelty. The silver foliage acts like a spotlight for neighboring flowers. Bright blooms often appear even more vibrant when planted beside it. This is a classic design technique. Dark next to light. Fine texture next to bold texture. Smooth next to fuzzy. The contrast makes both plants look better. And because lamb's ear tolerates dry conditions once established, it remains attractive even during periods when other plants may struggle. But if you've ever wished for a border plant that keeps producing flowers long after most perennials have stopped, the next plant may become your new favorite. Number 7. Hardy geranium. Most gardeners know the feeling. A plant finally reaches peak bloom. The garden looks fantastic. Then a few weeks later, the flowers are gone. Hardy geranium refuses to play by those rules. Instead of delivering a brief performance, many varieties continue blooming for months. That's one reason experienced gardeners often describe it as one of the hardest working perennials in the landscape. The flowers appear in shades of blue, violet, pink, and white, floating above attractive foliage that helps fill empty spaces within the border. But here's where things become especially interesting. Hardy geranium doesn't merely add flowers. It adds unity. The plant spreads gently, weaving through neighboring plants and helping create that lush, established appearance often associated with mature gardens. Nothing feels forced. Nothing feels rigid. Everything appears connected. And that's exactly what professional designers aim for. A border shouldn't look like individual plants standing next to one another. It should feel like a community of plants working together. Hardy geranium helps create that effect. Now before we reveal the next section of the countdown, let's talk about the biggest border mistake most gardeners never realize they're making. The biggest border mistake. Planting everything at the same height. Take a look at many beginner gardens and you'll notice something interesting. Every plant sits at roughly the same level. The result feels flat. Almost two-dimensional. Professional borders create depth by varying heights, even among low-growing plants. Some hug the ground. Some form soft mounds. Some send flower spikes upward. This layering creates shadows, movement, and visual interest. Think of it like a city skyline. If every building were exactly the same height, the view would be boring. Gardens work the same way. The most beautiful borders combine carpets, mounds, foliage plants, and flowering spikes to create a living tapestry. And coming up next, we're entering the top 6. These are the plants that many gardeners return to year after year because they deliver exceptional performance with surprisingly little effort. The next one blooms so generously that it can appear as if the flowers never stop. We're now entering the top 6. At this stage of the countdown, we're no longer talking about plants that are merely attractive. We're talking about plants that repeatedly prove themselves in real gardens. The kind that continue performing through heat, drought, changing seasons, and the occasional neglect that every gardener is guilty of from time to time. And the next plant has earned a reputation for doing exactly that. Number 6. Coreopsis. If there were an award for enthusiasm in the garden, Coreopsis would be a serious contender. Some perennials bloom. Coreopsis seems determined to bloom continuously. As temperatures warm, the plant begins producing bright flowers in shades of yellow, gold, orange, red, and striking two-tone combinations. Then it keeps going. And going. And going. Many gardeners are surprised by just how long the display can last. This matters because one of the secrets to a professional-looking border is consistency. A border shouldn't peak for 1 month and disappear for the next 3. It should provide color throughout the growing season. Coreopsis helps achieve that goal. Pollinators quickly discover the flowers. Butterflies frequently visit. And a simple trim after the first major bloom often encourages another impressive flush of color. But perhaps the greatest strength of Coreopsis is the feeling it creates. The flowers seem cheerful, energetic, almost impossible to ignore. A border filled with Coreopsis naturally draws attention. And that's exactly what great design often does. It gently guides the eye through the landscape. The next plant may be one of the most recommended perennials in gardening. For good reason. Number 5. Catmint. Ask 10 experienced gardeners to name a dependable perennial. There's a good chance catmint will appear on the list. This plant has built a reputation that few others can match. It tolerates heat. It tolerates drought. It attracts pollinators. Deer usually leave it alone. And despite all those advantages, it still manages to produce a spectacular display. Throughout late spring and summer, catmint becomes covered with clouds of lavender-blue flowers that seem to hover above soft gray-green foliage. The effect feels relaxed and natural. Almost effortless. But here's a little secret that experienced gardeners know. When the first major bloom cycle begins fading, don't panic. Simply give the plant a light trim. In many cases, catmint responds with another impressive wave of flowers. That's one reason it remains such a favorite. It keeps rewarding the gardener. Again and again. And if you think catmint is versatile, wait until you see the next plant. Because this one becomes most beautiful at exactly the moment many gardens begin fading. Number 4. Sedum, Autumn Joy. Every garden has a weak season. For many landscapes, that season arrives in late summer and early autumn. The brilliant spring flowers are gone. Summer bloomers begin slowing down. The border starts losing energy. Sedum, Autumn Joy, steps into the spotlight precisely when that happens. All summer long, the succulent blue-green foliage provides clean structure and texture. Then the flower heads begin forming. At first they appear soft and understated. Almost modest. But over time something remarkable happens. The color deepens. Pink becomes rose. Rose becomes copper. Copper becomes rich reddish tones that seem to glow in autumn sunlight. It's a transformation rather than a simple bloom. And that's what makes the plant so memorable. Visitors often notice it changing week after week. But the performance doesn't end there. Even after flowering, the dried seed heads continue adding structure throughout autumn and winter. That's one reason professional designers value plants like sedum. They're useful for more than one season. They're constantly contributing something. And now, before we reveal the top 3 plants in the entire countdown, let's discuss one of the most important landscaping techniques professionals use to create borders that feel rich, layered, and intentionally designed. Many gardeners assume beautiful borders require rare plants. Expensive plants. Complicated plants. In reality, professional-looking borders are often built using a surprisingly simple formula. Think in layers. Layer 1 is the ground layer. These are the plants that spread, soften edges, and cover exposed soil. Plants like creeping thyme, creeping phlox, moss phlox, and ajaga excel here. Layer 2 is the mound layer. These plants create structure and rhythm throughout the border. Examples include heuchera, dianthus, catmint, and lavender. Layer 3 is the accent layer. These plants provide seasonal highlights, flower spikes, or dramatic focal points. Coreopsis and sedum often fill this role beautifully. When all 3 layers work together, the border gains depth. Movement. Visual complexity. The garden begins feeling established rather than newly planted. This is one of the simplest ways to make a border appear professionally designed without spending a fortune. And now we're down to the final 3. The next plant doesn't just provide flowers. It provides one of the most recognizable fragrances in gardening. The plant at number 2 can transform bare soil into a living carpet. And the number 1 plant has become so dependable that many landscape designers consider it almost impossible to regret planting. Let's reveal them. We've reached the final 3. At this point, every plant remaining has earned a reputation not simply for beauty, but for consistently making borders look more intentional, more established, and more professionally designed. If you've been taking notes, now is the time to pay especially close attention. Because these final plants are often the ones gardeners remember long after the video ends. Number 3. Lavender. Few plants have become as iconic in garden design as lavender. In fact, if you were asked to picture a classic cottage garden, a Mediterranean landscape, or a professionally designed border, there's a good chance lavender would appear somewhere in that image. The reasons are obvious. The flowers are beautiful. The fragrance is unforgettable. The pollinators love it. But those aren't the only reasons designers keep using it. Lavender creates order. Its naturally rounded growth habit acts like a visual anchor within a border. Repeating it throughout a planting bed creates rhythm, helping connect different sections of the landscape into a single cohesive design. This is one of the oldest tricks in professional landscaping. Repeat strong shapes. Repeat reliable plants. Create visual harmony. Lavender excels at all 3. And here's something many beginners don't realize. One of the fastest ways to kill lavender is by trying too hard. Too much fertilizer. Too much water. Too much attention. Lavender actually prefers conditions that many other plants dislike. Give it full sun, good drainage, and room to breathe, and it often rewards gardeners with years of dependable beauty. The next plant proves that sometimes the most powerful border plant isn't the tallest, brightest, or most dramatic. Sometimes it's the one that quietly solves multiple problems at once. Number 2. Creeping thyme. Imagine walking through your garden and releasing fragrance with every step. Imagine replacing bare soil with a flowering carpet. Imagine reducing weeds while attracting pollinators at the same time. That's the power of creeping thyme. This low-growing perennial hugs the ground so tightly that it creates a living tapestry of foliage across the front of a border. Then flowering season arrives. Suddenly the entire plant becomes dotted with hundreds of tiny blooms that attract bees from across the garden. But what truly makes creeping thyme special is its versatility. It works between stepping stones, along pathways, at the front of flower beds, around decorative rocks. Wherever exposed soil exists, creeping thyme has the potential to improve it. And because the foliage releases fragrance when brushed or stepped on, the garden becomes more interactive. Visitors don't just look at it. They experience it. That's something great gardens do exceptionally well. They engage multiple senses. Yet even with all those advantages, one plant still stands above the rest. A plant trusted by beginners, loved by experts, and used repeatedly by professional landscape designers. Number 1. Nepeta, Walker's Low. If there were a safe bet Hall of Fame for perennials, Nepeta, Walker's Low would almost certainly be inducted on the first ballot. This is the plant that quietly earns its place in garden after garden. Not because it's trendy. Not because it's rare. Not because it's difficult to grow. But because it delivers. Consistently. Year after year. As spring gives way to summer, soft gray-green foliage begins producing waves of lavender-blue flowers that seem to float above the plant like a colorful cloud. The effect is both elegant and natural, formal enough for structured landscapes, relaxed enough for cottage gardens, and beautiful enough for almost any design style in between. But what truly separates Nepeta from many other perennials is its incredible adaptability. Heat. It handles it. Drought. Usually not a problem once established. Poor soil. Often performs beautifully. Deer pressure. Generally resistant. Pollinators. They absolutely love it. In other words, this plant solves problems instead of creating them. And that's one reason landscape designers trust it so often. A light trim after the first flowering period frequently encourages a second flush of blooms, extending the display even further. The result is a perennial that provides beauty, structure, movement, and reliability all at once. If you were building an entirely new border from scratch, Nepeta Walker's Low would be one of the smartest places to begin. Here's something interesting. When people visit a beautiful garden, they often notice the flowers first. But what they're actually responding to is structure. Flow. Balance. The feeling that everything belongs exactly where it is. That's the real purpose of a well-designed border. It's not simply decoration. It's the framework that holds the entire garden together. The 15 perennials we've covered today each contribute something unique. Some create carpets of flowers. Some provide unforgettable fragrance. Some suppress weeds. Some deliver months of color. Some continue looking beautiful even when nothing is blooming. And together, they demonstrate an important lesson. Professional-looking gardens aren't built with one perfect plant. They're built with combinations of plants that complement one another. Texture beside color. Structure beside softness. Ground covers beside mounding perennials. Flowers beside foliage. That's where the magic happens. So if you're planning a new border, don't focus only on blooms. Think about what the garden will look like in spring, summer, autumn, even winter. The more seasons a plant contributes to, the more valuable it becomes. And now we'd love to hear from you. Which of these 15 perennials would earn a place in your garden? Do you prefer colorful flowering borders, fragrant borders, pollinator-friendly borders, or low-maintenance designs? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this countdown and want more practical gardening ideas, plant recommendations, and professional landscaping secrets that help create a beautiful garden with less work, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next video. Because sometimes the plants that stay closest to the ground make the biggest impact of all.